Find a comfortable position. Let your hands grow still. Allow your breathing to find a slower rhythm. There is no duty calling you now, no work unfinished. The room is prepared. Everything required is already in place. When you are ready, we begin. Tonight's story is called A Day in the Life of a Lighthouse Keeper. You arrive while the morning is still deciding what it will become. Not bright yet, not dim either, just forming. The boat does not hurry. It rises, it settles, it returns to level again. The swell is patient, long. Even ahead, the lighthouse stands on its rock as if it has always been part of it. Whitewashed stone, a simple cylinder, no ornament, no drama, just presence. The air carries salt, but it carries other things too. Old rope, damp timber, a faint mineral sent from stone that has absorbed tides for decades and never complained about it. As the boat nears the landing, the sound changes. Water becomes shallower. Movement becomes closer. The hull brushes rock with a muted touch. Wood meets stone, then eases away again. You step across the small gap. No ceremony, no pause for courage, just a clean movement from boat to rock. Your boots find the surface easily. The stone is uneven, but not hostile. It has been worn into gentle contours by countless steps. It accepts weight. It holds. The tower rises directly from the rock, thicker walls than they first appear. Paint thinned in places where wind has leaned on it year after year. Salt streaks tracing faint lines downward. Old storms reduced to residue. The wind here does not gust, it presses. A steady hand against your back. Not pushing, not pulling, simply present. You move toward the door at the tower's base. Low set, dark wood against pale stone, edges rounded by use. Your palm finds the iron handle. Cool, but not cold. Almost the same temperature as your skin, as though it has been waiting in this air long enough to match it. The door opens inward with a low, contained sound. Not a creak, not a protest, just movement. Inside, the world shifts. Sound thickens. Light narrows, the smell changes. Oil, metal, old wood, wool that has dried many times and never fully forgotten damp. Small vertical windows cut into the tower's curve hold slices of morning. Pale, even unhurried. The spiral stair begins immediately. Stone steps curving upward along the wall. The center's worn smoother than the edges. Where tells its own history. Many feet, many hands, many quiet climbs that did not need to be remembered. You begin the ascent. The steps are steady, nearly identical to each other. The curve keeps you moving without instruction. Your hand rests on the rail along the inner curve. Iron darkened by contact, polished by palms. It meets you without contrast. Inhale, exhale. Breath settles into the rhythm of movement, not strained, not hurried, simply pacing itself. As you climb, the windows give you the sea in fragments, a strip of horizon, then gone, a patch of sky, then stone again. The thickness of the walls absorbs sound. Your footsteps land and disappear. The tower does not echo you back at yourself. Halfway up, the stair widens slightly. Just enough to allow a pause. You pause without deciding to. As though the architecture built the pause into the day. Your palm rests flat against the wall. Stone cool with night's memory. Stable, unmoving, you continue upward. The light changes as you near the lantern room. No longer thin slices, more open, more diffuse. The air feels lighter, touched more directly by outside. The final curve releases you into the lantern room. Circular space, glass bending around the horizon. Brass fittings catching the morning softly. No sharp shine, a glow instead. Surfaces polished so often they have learned restraint. The great lens stands at the center, taller than you expect. Concentric rings of glass nested inside each other. Curved, layered, quietly monumental. Even unlit, it gathers light, holds it, bends it into softness. You step closer. The floor here is wood, boards set in a radial pattern that echoes the room. They give slightly beneath your weight, not weakness, familiarity. Outside the glass, the sea stretches wide, not dramatic, not restless, just continuing. The tide is mid-cycle, neither highest nor lowest, movement without spectacle. The horizon line is clean, a soft band separating water from sky. Gulls drift at a distance, carried by air currents, unhurried. Their silhouettes appear briefly, then dissolve back into the brightness. You place your hand against the glass. The pain is the temperature of the room, no shock of cold, no warmth either, just the quiet agreement of barrier. From this height, the rock looks smaller, but not insignificant. It holds its shape against water's repetition. The boat that brought you has already eased away, returning to open sea without insisting on attention. You walk a slow circle around the room. The movement feels natural, no corners, no edges to interrupt the pace. The architecture encourages continuity. Each step follows the curve. Each step lands, each step releases. As you move, light shifts across the lens and across your hands, not flashing, not flaring, spreading evenly. Dust motes hang in the air, visible only when they drift through a brighter band, then gone again. The mechanism that will later turn the lens is silent for now. Gears resting, weight held, potential stored. Nothing here is anxious about stillness. Stillness is part of the design. You pause at one side of the room and look outward. From here, you cannot hear the sea properly, only a distant suggestion, a low rhythm too far away to demand attention. The sky holds a pale consistency. No sharp clouds, no hard contrast, just layers of brightness merging into each other. The morning has settled into itself. You rest both hands on the inner railing. Metal meets skin, no contrast, no edge. The height does not create distance, it creates perspective. The sea becomes pattern rather than overwhelm. The rock becomes anchor rather than isolation. The tower becomes continuation rather than statement. You take another slow circuit. The lens remains at the center like a quiet heart. The glass holds the horizon in a continuous curve. The brass holds its muted glow. You approach the small desk set against the interior wall, curved to match the room, fitted into the architecture as though it belongs there naturally. A logbook rests on the desk, thick cover, leather softened at the corners, darkened where hands have lifted it again and again. You open it, pages filled with steady entries, weather, visibility, conditions noted without emotion, not because the days are empty, because the work is calm. You turn one page slowly, then another. Different handwriting appears across the years. Different hands, same tone, quiet, measured, present. You close the book gently. Your gaze drops to the floorboards again. Radial wood grain, dark knots, light streaks, all of it held in place. Near the outer edge where boards meet wall, you notice a small irregularity. Not a split, not damage, a shallow notch, smoothed down by years of passing steps. A tiny mark, almost nothing. The edges are too deliberate to be chance. A keeper long ago in a long hour. A knife tip, a moment of pressure. A trace left behind without needing it to matter. Time has softened it. Footsteps have nearly erased it, and still it remains. You step past it. You do not make anything of it. You simply let it exist. The lens stands quietly. The sea continues beyond the glass. The tower holds you without asking for anything. The day has begun, not with urgency, not with effort, just with steadiness. And you remain within it, calm and unhurried, as the lighthouse prepares itself for the long, simple rhythm of keeping watch. You descend from the lantern room slowly, not because you need to, because the tower invites that pace. The spiral turns you inward, stone on one side, a narrow rail on the other. Each step is familiar, even if it is your first time here. Light arrives in thin vertical slices. A window, a pale strip of sea, then stone again. Your hand glides along the inner wall. The surface is cool, not cold, held from the night. The air thickens as you move lower. Oil, old timber, a faint metallic note from iron fittings. You reach the mid-landing. The stair widens by a fraction. A built-in pause, you stop there, not a decision. A natural settling, you listen. The tower has its own quiet, not silence, structure. A small draft moves upward through the stairwell, not a gust, a gentle exchange of air, as though the building is breathing. You continue down, the base level holds less light, more scent, more warmth held in wood. A narrow door leads into the keeper's quarters. You push it open. The room is compact, arranged with intention. Nothing excessive, nothing missing. A small table beneath a window, a chair angled toward it, a bunk along the wall, shelves built into stone, hooks set in wood for coats and lanterns. The window is not large, but it gives the sea in a steady frame. From here, the water looks closer, more textured, less like a field, more like a surface that is always moving. Waves press against rock in even intervals, not crashing, just arriving. Then easing away, you step toward the table. The tabletop is worn smooth in the center. Faint scratches layered over faint scratches, marks that no longer read as damage, more like evidence of life continuing. A kettle sits on a small stove, blackened slightly at the base. Used, clean, returned to its place. A mug hangs on a peg, ceramic, plain. A small chip near the rim that has been smoothed by time. You do not rush into tasks. You take inventory the way you take breath. Slowly, without judgment, you hang your coat on the hook. The fabric settles with a soft shift. You place your satchel down by the chair. Leather touching wood, quiet contact. You set your hand on the windowsill. The wood is cool. Salt air has bleached it in places. The grain feels raised slightly, as if it has been weathered into texture. Outside, the rock shelf curves around the tower's base. Dark stone, wet patches, dry patches, tiny pools caught in shallow depressions. The tide has already moved once today. It will move again. The rock is used to being taken and returned. You step away from the window and open a small cupboard. Inside, tools are laid out with care. A brush, a polishing cloth, a small oil can with its spout capped, spare wicks wrapped neatly, matches in a tin. Everything has a place, not because of perfection, because repetition works better when objects return. You close the cupboard, you take the logbook from the shelf below the window. This is the working log, not the lantern room record. The day's quieter notes, you open it, pages carry dates, wind direction, visibility, tide condition, small observations that matter later. You pick up the pencil beside it. The pencil is worn to one side, a familiar angle shaped by the same grip over and over. You write today's date. You pause, not to think hard, to match the day's tone. You write the morning condition. Sea steady, wind pressing, sky pale. You do not add adjectives that perform. You add what holds. You close the book halfway and leave it open. Ready, available. Now you make tea, not as a luxury, as a small anchor. You fill the kettle. The water comes from a tank fed by rain, filtered through the tower's practical design. The kettle sits on the stove. You light it. The flame takes without drama. A small blue presence. Contained, you wait. While the water heats, you move through the room slowly, checking without fuss. A lantern on the shelf, glass clear, metal clean. A spare blanket folded neatly at the end of the bunk, wool holding warmth even when unused. A tin of biscuits, not new, not empty, simply present. A barometer on the wall, its face slightly yellowed, needle steady. A clock ticks softly. Not loud enough to pull attention, just enough to remind the room that time is passing whether you measure it or not. The kettle begins to murmur. A low sound, then a little more, not a sudden boil. A gradual rise, you pour the water into the mug. Steam lifts, then thins, you take the first sip. Warmth meets tongue, then settles into chest. You stand at the window again with the mug in both hands. The sea moves in long strokes. The swell lifts, then lowers, a rhythm that does not speed up for anyone. You let your shoulders drop by a fraction, not forced, just responding. A gull passes close to the rock shelf. It does not call, it glides, then vanishes out of frame. The tower holds steady behind you. Now you begin the morning maintenance. Not because something is wrong, because continuity depends on small attention. You set the mug down. You take the brush from the cupboard. You step back into the stairwell and begin the climb again. Not all the way, just to the level below the lantern room. This level holds the mechanism housing, the column where weight descends, the system that translates gravity into rotation. You open the small access panel. Inside, the rope is taut. The weight is lifted from last night's winding, or perhaps it has already descended enough to require resetting. You check it with your eyes first, then with your hand. The rope fibers are intact, no fraying, no slack. The metal casing is cool, smooth, a faint vibration when the system is engaged. Right now, in daylight, the lens is still, so the system rests. But the check remains. You close the panel. You continue upward to the lantern room. The air changes again. Lighter, more open, more sky in it. The lens stands at the center, catching daylight without effort. You take the polishing cloth. You begin with the outer ring. Small circles, slow, consistent. You do not scrub, you glide. The cloth makes almost no sound. Glass receives the movement without resistance. You move to the next ring. Same motion. The work is soothing because it has a shape, a beginning, a continuation, no need for speed. As you polish, the world outside remains steady. Sea shifting, horizon holding, light slowly strengthening. You pause and step back. The lens is clear. It was clear before, but clarity is something you keep, not something you fix. You return the cloth to its place. Now you check the lamp housing, the fuel level, the wick condition, the clean fit of the parts. You do not light it, not yet. In daylight, the sun owns the work. You walk one slow circle around the lantern room again. The notch in the floor catches your eye as you pass. You do not stop for it. You simply note it, a trace, a reminder. Your hand rests briefly on the rail. Metal meets skin, neutral, balanced. You stand at the eastern panes and look out. The water is brighter now, not sparkling, just lifted. A band of silver stretches near the horizon where light gathers more fully. You let your gaze soften, no scanning, no searching, just the wide, steady field. This is the heart of the keeper's work, not vigilance. Availability, being here, ready to notice, without hunting for problems. You take one more slow circuit, then you begin your descent again. Down the spiral, into thicker air, into oil scent, into the small room that holds the day's ordinary tasks. At the table, you open the logbook again. You add one line. Lens checked, glass clear, mechanism secure. You close the book gently. You sit, not collapsing, just settling. The chair creaks faintly, then holds. You place your hands on your thighs. Breath continues, in, out. Outside the window, the sea continues its long repetition. Wave lifts, wave lowers. Nothing demands an immediate next step. The day is wide, the tower is steady. You are in place, and without any urgency at all, the morning work completes itself into quiet readiness, as though the lighthouse has simply absorbed you into its routine and found you suitable for it. You remain seated for a moment longer, not because there is nowhere to go, because the stillness feels earned. The chair supports you evenly, wood beneath you, stone beneath that, rock beneath that. Layers of steadiness. You rise slowly. The room does not react. It simply allows the movement. You return to the window. The sea has shifted again, not dramatically. Just enough that the light rests differently along its surface. Where earlier there was silver, now there is a wider band of blue-gray. The swell lengthens. Waves no longer announce their edges. They merge into one continuous motion. You rest your forearm along the sill. The wood carries a faint roughness from salt air, not splintered, just textured. Outside, the rock shelf glistens in places where water has recently withdrawn. A small tide pool reflects the sky. You notice how the reflection trembles slightly with each distant vibration of water beyond it. Even stillness here moves. You step back from the window. The afternoon stretches open before you. No fixed schedule, no clock demanding response, only intervals. You take the broom from behind the door, not because the room is untidy, because dust gathers regardless of intention. You sweep slowly. The sound is soft. Straw across wood, even strokes. Small grains of sand near the threshold gather into a quiet line. You move them aside. The act is not correction, it is continuation. You set the broom back in place. You check the oil supply again. The tin is 3/4 full, enough for tonight, enough for tomorrow. You run your fingers along the outside of the container. Cool metal, steady weight, you replace it. You open the cupboard once more and remove the polishing cloth again. Not for the lens this time, for the small interior panes in the keeper's room. You wipe them gently. The glass clears by degrees, not because it was opaque, but because salt mist settles invisibly. Each circular motion reveals a slightly sharper edge of sea. You pause halfway through, look outward. The horizon feels closer now, as though the air between you and it has thinned. A vessel moves in the distance. Slow, deliberate, its wake spreads behind it in a faint V shape. You do not follow it with your eyes once it leaves the frame. You finish the pane, return the cloth. The tower hums faintly above, not from motion yet, just from air moving through stone. You step back into the stairwell, upward again. The spiral does not feel repetitive. It feels cyclical. Stone underfoot, hand on wall, breath steady. At the mid-landing, you pause again. From this angle, the sea appears framed, contained in a narrow slice. You lean slightly outward to widen the view. The water carries more texture now. Wind has increased by a fraction. Not sharp, just more defined. You continue upward. The lantern room greets you with brighter light than before. The lens catches the afternoon sun differently now. Its rings glow more distinctly. You step into the circle of glass, walk once around the perimeter. The floorboards creak faintly beneath you, not complaint, acknowledgement. The carved notch in the wood rests near the outer edge. You slow this time, you crouch. Run your fingertip lightly along the shallow groove. It fits beneath your touch, not perfectly, but enough. You do not imagine the hand that carved it. You do not build a story around it. You simply register that time leaves small signatures. You stand again. Light shifts slightly as you move. Outside, the swell rises higher against the rock. Foam gathers briefly, then thins. You rest both hands on the rail. Metal meets skin. Neutral, balanced. The boundary between you and the structure feels thin. You inhale slowly. The air carries faint salt even up here. You exhale. The afternoon stretches without interruption. You begin checking the lens housing again, not because it requires it, because routine builds continuity. You examine each brass fitting, each screw, each joint, nothing loose, nothing strained. You wipe one small smudge near the base. The cloth glides easily. The glass beneath remains clear. You step back. Let the lens stand. It does not need your attention every moment. It holds daylight effortlessly. You move toward the eastern panes. The sky has deepened slightly in tone, not darker, just denser. Clouds have thinned into broad strokes, no dramatic formations, just presence. You walk another slow circle, then another. The movement becomes less conscious, more like orbit. The center remains fixed. You revolve gently around it. The tower feels less like a building now and more like a mechanism you inhabit. Stone rising through you, light resting around you. The afternoon light softens by a fraction. You notice it not by color, but by the way shadows lengthen along the floor. The notch in the wood casts a faint line beside it. Earlier it was flat. Now it holds dimension. You pause near it again, not to study, just to witness. Then you continue. The sea's tone shifts subtly. A darker band forms further out, the tide turning again. You lean closer to the glass. The pane holds steady beneath your palm. Beyond it, the water seems to move in long, parallel lines. No sudden gestures, just migration. You descend halfway down the spiral. Open the mechanism panel again. The weight remains lifted from the morning check. Its metal casing reflects faint afternoon light. You touch the rope. Firm, secure, you close the panel, continue down, back into the keeper's room. The air here feels warmer than before. Not heated, just held. You sit at the table again, open the logbook, add a note. Wind slightly stronger. Tide turning, you close it. You eat a simple meal: bread, cheese, a small apple, no ceremony. Just sustenance. The clock ticks softly. You do not look at it, you step outside again. The rock beneath your boots is drier now. The tide has pulled further away. Seaweed lies exposed along the edge. The air carries a faint mineral scent. You walk the curve of the rock shelf slowly. The lighthouse shadow stretches longer behind you now, the afternoon leaning toward evening. You sit on the same flat stone as before. This time you do not close your eyes. You watch. The water lifts, settles, lifts again. The horizon remains unbroken. You feel how small the structure is against the field of sea, and how steady you stand again. Return to the tower, up the spiral once more. The climb feels familiar now, predictable. Breath aligns with steps. You emerge into the lantern room again. Light has shifted further, warmer at the edges, softer at the center. You stand still, not circling this time, just present. The lens catches the afternoon glow and holds it. Outside, the darker band in the sea has moved closer to shore. The tide continues its long transition. You rest your hand once more on the rail. Metal and skin equal. You inhale, you exhale. The day is leaning, but not ending. And within this steady rhythm of checking, tending, recording, and returning, the lighthouse absorbs the afternoon into its quiet structure, holding both sea and sky in its wide glass circle while you move through the simple continuity of the watch. The afternoon does not accelerate, it deepens. You remain standing in the lantern room, hands resting lightly on the rail, and notice how the quality of light has changed again. Not brighter, not dimmer, more layered. The sea below no longer reflects in wide silver plains. Instead, its surface holds longer bands of muted blue-gray, stitched together by darker seams where the tide has turned more fully. From this height, the water does not appear restless. It appears organized, not by force, by repetition. You begin another slow circuit of the room. The motion feels less like walking now, and more like tracing the inside of a clock that has no face. Each step follows the curve naturally. The boards beneath your boots respond with a low, contained tone, not an echo, just presence. The carved notch in the floor lies ahead. You do not aim for it, you simply pass near it. Light strikes it at a shallow angle now, casting a faint crescent of shadow along its edge. Earlier it was almost invisible. Now it carries dimension. You continue. Outside the eastern panes, a slight change in wind crosses the water. You see it not as movement of air, but as a fine corrugation in the sea's surface. Long lines form, then dissolve. The swell beneath them remains steady. You pause at the eastern arc of glass, rest your palm against it. The pane feels cooler than it did an hour ago. Not cold, just less warmed by the sun. Temperature equalizes as afternoon leans. You inhale slowly. The air inside the lantern room feels balanced, stone cooled from below, glass cooled from without, lamp metal resting in between. You exhale. The horizon appears less distinct now. Edges soften first at the periphery, then toward the center. The sky above has thickened slightly in tone. No dramatic clouds, just a gradual gathering. You resume your circuit. As you walk, your awareness shifts inward, from sea to glass to floor to breathe. The center of gravity lowers gently. You feel the weight of your body settle more fully into your steps. Heel, roll, release. The sequence repeats without strain. At the midpoint of the room, you pause and widen your gaze. Instead of focusing on the water directly below, you allow your sight to expand toward the farthest visible distance. The field grows larger. The lighthouse feels smaller within it. Then, gently, you bring your awareness back inward again, to the railing beneath your fingers, to the faint warmth remaining in the brass. No escalation, just shift. Outside, a vessel appears further along the horizon line. Its outline is softened by distance. It moves slowly, barely altering position from one breath to the next. You do not track it continuously. You allow it to enter and leave your field of awareness on its own. The room remains unchanged. The mechanism rests in readiness. You step toward the central column and place your palm flat against it. The metal housing carries a faint vibration, not from rotation yet, but from the settling of the structure against wind. It is subtle, almost imagined. You remain there for a moment, breath steady, shoulders lowering. The afternoon has entered its long middle. Time stretches here in horizontal bands, not advancing. Extending, you move again toward the windows. The sea below appears darker nearer the rock, lighter farther out. The gradation is smooth, no dividing line. You lean slightly forward, resting your forearms along the rail. The gesture is not effortful, it is natural. From this angle, the rock shelf at the base of the tower looks broader. Tide pools reflect the sky in uneven shapes. One pool trembles briefly as a small swell reaches it, then stills again. The repetition feels reassuring. There is something steady about water that knows its direction. You stand upright again. Continue your circuit. As you pass the notch once more, you notice how your step adjusts automatically to avoid placing weight directly upon it. The body remembers small details without instruction. You do not alter your pace. You allow the rhythm to continue. Light shifts slightly. Shadows lengthen along the western side of the room. The brass rail reflects a softer tone. The floorboards hold deeper color. You sit briefly in the wooden chair. The change in height alters perspective. From here, the ceiling feels higher. The lens feels larger. The sea appears more distant. You rest your hands on your knees. Breath deepens again. Inhale, exhale. The intervals between breaths widen slightly, not forced, just extended. Outside, the vessel you noticed earlier has progressed further along its path. Its wake stretches longer now, a faint line dissolving into darker water. You do not count the distance. You do not measure time. You simply allow the awareness of movement to pass through you. You rise again, move toward the spiral stair, descend halfway, pause at the landing. From here, the sea appears framed in a vertical slice. The light in that slice has changed more dramatically than in the full panorama above. Here it appears warmer, denser, a subtle difference created by angle alone. You remain still for 3 breaths, then ascend again. Back in the lantern room, the shift toward evening is more apparent, not sudden, but undeniable. The sky's tone has deepened. The sea's surface appears smoother at distance. Closer to shore, texture remains visible. The carved notch casts a longer shadow now. You crouch beside it again, not studying, simply aligning your eye closer to its plane. The indentation is shallower than you remembered. Years of passing feet have nearly erased it. Even traces wear down. You stand. Continue walking. As you move, your awareness softens at the edges. The distinction between you and the room feels thinner. The boundary between skin and metal less defined. The boundary between glass and horizon less distinct. You rest your forehead lightly against a pane. The contact is brief, cooler now. The sea beyond appears layered rather than separate. Sky merging downward, water rising upward. No line dividing them clearly. You step back. The lens catches a lower angle of sun. Its prisms glow faintly, not yet lit by flame, but ready. You approach the mechanism again, check the tension. The weight remains lifted, the rope firm. No correction needed. You close the panel gently. The air carries a slight shift, a cooler current entering through unseen seams. The temperature change is small but present. You inhale it. The breath feels clearer now. The afternoon is no longer stretching outward, it is drawing inward. You resume your slow orbit of the room. This time, your steps feel lighter, less deliberate, more fluid. The floor beneath you seems to hold you without resistance. You notice how the beam housing at the center appears slightly darker now in contrast to the brightened glass. Light continues to lower. You pause at the southern panes. Allow your gaze to widen once more from the fine texture of water near the rock to the farthest visible seam of horizon. Then bring it inward again to your own breath, to the steady rise and fall beneath your ribs. The shifts are subtle, controlled, no surge, no emotional swell, just modulation. The carved notch receives one last band of direct afternoon light. Its shadow lengthens, then softens. Soon it will disappear into evening. You complete another full circuit, then another. Time has thinned. The sea continues, the rock holds, the sky deepens. And within this long, even drift of afternoon toward dusk, the tower gathers both light and quiet into itself, while your movement inside it becomes less like action and more like current, steady, unbroken, and entirely at ease within the slow turning of the day. You slow without deciding to, not stopping, just reducing. The circuit widens in sensation, even though the room has not changed size. The light now sits lower along the panes. It no longer crowns the glass, it rests midway as though preparing to descend. Outside, the sea has entered a deeper register. Its color carries more weight, less reflection, more body. A gull passes once across the southern arc. Silent, wing extended, it does not circle, it does not linger. It crosses and dissolves into tone. You do not follow it. Your attention returns inward, to the rail, to the floor beneath your boots, to the steady interior column holding its quiet potential. Breath lengthens again. Inhale, exhale. The air feels thinner in brightness, but thicker in presence. Evening is not here yet, but the day has released its height, and the tower, without altering its posture, begins to gather that lowering light into itself, holding it evenly, patiently, as though this gradual descent has always been part of its design. The afternoon continues to wane, not collapsing, not concluding, simply lowering its center of brightness by degrees so small they barely register. You stand near the eastern panes and allow your gaze to soften rather than focus. The sea no longer appears patterned in detail. It appears layered, dark beneath, lighter above, movement held inside tone rather than traced by edges. You begin another slow circuit of the lantern room. The floorboards feel steadier now, as though the warmth of the day has traveled through them and settled. Each step lands fully before the next begins. Heel, roll, release. The rhythm repeats without needing correction. Light touches the brass rail in a thinner band than before. It does not gleam, it rests. You pause near the southern arc of glass and widen your awareness beyond the immediate surface of the water. Instead of following individual swells, you allow your sight to stretch toward the broadest visible field, horizon to horizon, until the lighthouse feels momentarily smaller within it. Then, gently, you bring your awareness back inward, to the faint warmth in your palms, to the steady temperature of the room, to the slow rise and fall beneath your ribs. The shift is quiet, controlled. The carved notch in the floor catches your peripheral vision as you pass. You do not crouch this time. You simply register how its shadow has lengthened slightly with the lowering light. Some marks deepen with shadow rather than brightness. Outside, a faint band of darker water moves across the mid-distance. Not a storm, not a surge, just a change in current. The alteration is visible only because you have been watching long enough to notice contrast. The sea does not announce it, it absorbs it. You rest your hand briefly against the glass again. The pain is cooler now, not cold. just closer to equilibrium. The boundary between your skin and its surface feels reduced. For a moment, the difference between inside and outside seems theoretical. You step back and move toward the central column. Place your palm against the housing of the mechanism. There is a faint presence beneath it, not movement yet, but stored readiness. The weight remains lifted from earlier winding. It waits in suspension, patient within its channel. You inhale slowly, exhale longer. The air in the lantern room feels slightly denser, as though the day has gathered itself inward rather than outward. You resume your orbit. As you walk, your awareness shifts downward from horizon to water, from water to rock, from rock to your own stance. The center of gravity lowers, shoulders ease, jaw unclenches. The carved notch approaches again. This time, the light grazes it at a steeper angle. The indentation appears almost level with the grain now, years of passing feet having softened its edges further. You allow your boot to pass beside it without altering your step. Memory does not require constant attention to remain present. Outside, a vessel appears far to the north, smaller than the earlier one, nearly indistinguishable from the seam of water. It moves slowly enough that its progression is perceptible only across several breaths. You do not follow it. You allow it to exist within the larger field. The sky above has shifted from layered brightness into unified tone. The color deepens without intensifying. It gathers rather than brightens. You sit in the wooden chair again. From this lower vantage point, the room feels taller, the lens more prominent at the center. The concentric rings of glass catch the afternoon's remaining light in softened planes. No glare, only diffusion. Your hands rest on your thighs. Breathing slows again. Inhale, exhale. The intervals between breaths lengthen without effort. You notice a faint irregularity along the brass rail as you rise again, a small section worn slightly smoother than the rest, likely from years of repeated grip at that exact point. The metal there reflects less light. It has been touched often enough to hold a different finish. You place your fingers there briefly. The difference is subtle. Then you continue. Outside, the tide has drawn further back from the rock shelf. More of the stone's darker bands are visible now, marking previous water lines in long, uneven arcs. Pools remain scattered along the base, their surfaces still except when a distant swell reaches them and trembles their reflections. The room grows fractionally cooler, not enough to cause discomfort, enough to notice. You descend halfway down the spiral stair, pause at the landing. From this angle, the sea appears narrower, framed by stone. The change in perspective shifts the scale of everything. What seemed expansive above now feels contained within the vertical slice of the window. You stand there for 3 breaths, then ascend again. Back in the lantern room, the lowering light has thinned further. The beam has not yet been lit, but the lens seems to anticipate its role. The prisms hold the remaining daylight with quiet restraint. You move toward the eastern panes, lean slightly forward. The horizon appears less distinct than before. Sky and sea approach one another in tone. You widen your gaze once more outward to the farthest visible seam, then return it inward to the faint vibration beneath your feet as wind presses lightly against the structure. The modulation is subtle, waveform rather than shift. The carved notch fades gradually into deeper shadow. You do not look for it again. Your circuit continues. Outside, the vessel has progressed farther along its route, nearly lost now against the dimming field. Its wake dissolves more quickly in the cooling light. There is something reassuring about water that keeps its direction without declaration. You rest both hands against the glass. The pain now feels distinctly cooler than your skin. The difference is gentle but present. The boundary reasserts itself slightly. Evening approaches. The air holds a different quality now, thinner in brightness, thicker in presence. You step back, Walk slowly toward the mechanism. Check the tension again. The weight remains suspended properly. No adjustment required. You close the panel softly. The sound is small, absorbed by the room. As you resume your orbit, you feel your own movement becoming less like walking and more like drift. The architecture carries you. The curve guides you. Your breathing aligns again with the broader rhythm of the sea below. Inhale as a distant swell lifts. Exhale as it settles. The room has grown quieter, though nothing has ceased. Sound has simply thinned. A faint clink from somewhere below, perhaps a loose hook against stone, arrives and disappears quickly. The sky continues to deepen. The sea absorbs more of the light. The tower stands. And within this long, steady descent toward dusk, your awareness widens and softens at once, expanding toward scale, then settling inward toward breath again and again, until the movement of the day feels less like passage and more like slow immersion, steady and unbroken. The room feels rounder now, not smaller, not larger, just more enclosed in tone. You move toward the western panes again. The sea there carries less distinction between swell and surface. Its motion appears slower, though it has not changed speed. Distance softens everything into cohesion. You allow your gaze to widen once more. From the faint shimmer nearest the rock to the furthest seam where sky lowers into water. For a moment, the tower feels narrow within that breadth. Stone rising from rock, glass rising from stone, light waiting within glass. Then, gently, your awareness lowers again. From horizon to pane to rail to the quiet weight in your stance. The modulation continues. Outside, the darker band in the mid-distance has thinned. It no longer reads as a line, it reads as density. Evening approaches not by arrival, but by subtraction. Brightness withdraws, edges soften. The air inside the lantern room cools by another fraction. You inhale the difference. It settles behind the ribs. You descend 2 steps into the spiral, then pause, not leaving, just shifting position within the architecture. From this height, the lens appears larger against the dimming glass. The concentric rings gather what remains of daylight without resisting its decline. You ascend again, complete another circuit. The carved notch in the floor is now almost indistinguishable from grain. Shadow has leveled it. Presence remains, definition fades. A gull passes once more across the southern arc, this time lower. Wing steady, no call. It crosses through diminishing light and dissolves. You do not follow. Breath lengthens again. Inhale, exhale. The interval between them widens slightly. The sea below holds its pattern. The rock keeps its posture. The sky lowers in tone. And within the slow narrowing of light, your movement through the lantern room becomes quieter still, less step, more current, as afternoon releases its height, and the tower gathers what remains of day into a steadier, deeper register. The afternoon releases its last height without declaration. You remain in motion within the lantern room, though the movement has changed in quality. It no longer feels like walking with intention. It feels like aligning with a curve that was already present. The sea beyond the glass has deepened again in tone. What was layered earlier now appears unified, a wide field of muted blue-gray that holds motion within itself rather than displaying it on the surface. You pause near the eastern panes. Allow your gaze to rest low along the waterline where the rock meets the tide. The contact there is gentle. No crash, no spray, only a slow folding of swell against stone, then release. You widen your awareness outward once more, beyond the visible horizon, into scale. For a moment, the lighthouse feels like a slender vertical thread in a much larger fabric of sea and sky. Then you let your attention lower again, to the rail beneath your palm, to the faint weight in your heels, to the quiet expansion and settling of breath. The modulation remains controlled. No surge, no swell, only shift. You continue your circuit. The carved notch in the floor receives almost no light now. It exists more as texture than mark. You do not bend toward it. You simply step near it, aware of its presence without defining it. Outside, the last traces of afternoon brightness gather near the horizon in a faint, diluted band. Above it, the sky has begun to thicken into a steadier blue that leans toward dusk. The air inside the lantern room cools another fraction. The change is small, but unmistakable. You move toward the central column. Rest your palm against the mechanism housing again. There is a quiet readiness beneath your touch, not motion yet, potential. You inhale slowly. The air feels clearer now. Exhale, longer. The intervals widen. You descend halfway down the spiral. Pause at the landing. From here, the sea appears framed in a narrower vertical band, darker than before. The rock shelf at the base of the tower has grown more visible where tide has receded further. Pools reflect the dimming sky in uneven patches, each one holding a slightly different shade of deepening blue. You remain for 3 breaths, then ascend. Back in the lantern room, light has lowered to the point where it no longer touches the ceiling dome. The upper curve of the structure rests in shadow. The glass panes hold only the last diluted traces of day. You begin another slow orbit. This time, your steps feel lighter, less deliberate. The architecture carries you. The lens at the center gathers what remains of natural light and holds it in muted layers. The concentric rings appear darker now, their edges less distinct. You pause at the western arc. Outside, the sea has entered its evening register. Motion continues, but texture dissolves into tone. Individual swells are no longer easily distinguished. The surface reads as a single breathing body. There is something reassuring about movement that does not demand to be seen clearly. You rest your forehead briefly against the glass. It is cool now. The boundary between inside and outside sharpens for a moment through temperature, then softens again through breath. You step back, walk toward the control panel. The time has arrived without being announced. You check the fuel, the wick, the alignment of the lens. Everything sits precisely where it should. You ignite the lamp. It does not flare, it blooms. Contained brightness fills the inner rings of glass gradually, expanding outward in quiet radiance. The lantern room shifts tone instantly, not from dark to bright, but from passive light to active light. The mechanism engages. The weight begins its descent. At first, the rotation is nearly imperceptible. The lens turns, so slowly that you sense movement only by fixing your gaze on a distant point along the horizon and noticing its change relative to the frame. The first sweep of the beam extends outward. It does not strike sharply, it spreads. A wide arc of softened brilliance glides across the sea, resting briefly upon its surface before moving on. Inside the lantern room, shadow follows light in steady procession. The carved notch catches a fleeting glow, then returns to darkness. You stand at the center of the room and allow the beam to circle. Each rotation marks time without announcing it. Inhale as brightness gathers near the southern panes. Exhale as it drifts westward and fades. The rhythm establishes itself quickly. Outside, the sea receives the light without resistance. Where the beam passes, the water thickens into silver for a breath, then dissolves again into darker tone. The sky deepens. No stars assert themselves sharply. Instead, faint clusters begin to appear as softened concentrations of light within darkness. They rest rather than shine. You resume your orbit of the room. Now the architecture feels different. The circular path you trace mirrors the turning lens. You are not separate from the mechanism. Your movement aligns with it. The brass rail reflects a muted halo that travels along its curve before dissolving. The floorboards brighten in brief bands, then dim. You sit in the wooden chair. The beam circles you. The effect is tidal rather than mechanical. Light swells, light recedes. The The carved notch glows faintly once more as the beam passes, then returns to shadow. Memory does not disappear in darkness. It softens. You rise again. Descend halfway down the spiral. Observe the weight as it lowers within its channel. The rope remains taut, translating descent into rotation with precise inevitability. You rest your hand against the inner stone wall. There is a faint vibration, not urgent, not loud, simply present. You ascend again. The lantern room greets you with its alternating glow and dimness. The sea beyond has become nearly indistinguishable from sky, except when the beam outlines its surface in wide arcs. You move to the rail, rest both hands upon it. The metal matches your temperature. The boundary between palm and iron feels minimal. Breathing deepens again. Inhale, exhale, longer now. The rotation continues. The beam extends, returns, extends again. Time is no longer measured by minutes. It is measured by sweeps. Outside, a faint mist gathers along the water's surface. When the beam passes through it, the light diffuses more broadly, expanding outward in softened bloom rather than defined ribbon. The effect is gentler, more enveloping. Inside, the shadows blur further, edges soften. The carved notch disappears almost entirely unless illuminated directly. You stand near the center once more. Allow the movement of light to occur around you without following it with your eyes. Awareness widens, then lowers, from horizon to pane to rail to breathe. The modulation continues. The night settles fully now. There is no residual brightness at the horizon, only layered dark. The beam defines distance. The sea moves steadily beneath it. You descend slowly to the keeper's quarters. The air grows warmer, more enclosed. The lamp below burns low. You sit at the table briefly. The beam above continues its arc, visible faintly through the small window as periodic glow. You rise again and return to the lantern room. The weight continues its descent, unbroken. The mechanism hums in low articulation. You allow your breathing to align once more with the cycle. Inhale as light gathers along the eastern panes. Exhale as it glides westward. The carved notch remains unseen now, folded into the grain of shadow. The glass holds faint streaks of dried salt from storms long past. The brass rail curves steadily. The tower stands. The sea moves, the beam turns. And within the long, measured rhythm of rotation, your own presence softens further, no longer distinct from the architecture that surrounds you, no longer separate from the tide that rises and falls below, but part of the continuous arc that carries light outward into darkness and returns it again, endlessly, calmly, without urgency, as night deepens. And the lighthouse keeps its steady, unbroken watch. Evening settles more fully into the structure, not as arrival, as wait. The lantern room feels rounder now, less defined by edges and more by tone. The glass panes hold darkness between sweeps of light. The beam continues its steady arc, but it no longer feels new. It feels established. You remain standing near the center of the room, not watching the beam directly, allowing it to pass. Each rotation shifts the room in gradual increments, brightening one wall, softening another, tracing the brass rail in a muted halo before withdrawing again. The sea beyond the glass has lost most of its surface detail. When the beam reaches it, a wide sheen emerges briefly, then dissolves into the larger field of dark. You move toward the eastern panes. The glass feels cool beneath your palm, but not cold. Temperature has equalized fully now between inside and out. The distinction between air on either side of the pane feels thinner. Wind presses lightly against the exterior. The tower does not respond. It stands in balance. You begin another slow circuit of the room. The path feels less like movement now and more like continuation. The curve of the architecture guides your steps without decision. Floorboards receive each footfall quietly. The carved notch is invisible in this light unless the beam passes directly over it. You do not search for it. You allow it to remain where it has always been part of the grain. The lens turns with precise calm. The mechanism beneath your feet continues its descent. You lower your hand to the brass rail again. The metal meets your skin without contrast. For a moment, you cannot tell where warmth ends and surface begins. Outside, the mist along the water has thickened slightly. The beam widens as it moves through it, expanding rather than slicing. The effect is softer now, more atmospheric than directional. You widen your gaze outward, beyond the immediate reach of the beam, into the larger field of night. The lighthouse feels small within that scale, a narrow vertical line against expansive dark. Then you allow your awareness to lower inward again, to the steady temperature of the room, to the faint vibration carried through the floorboards, to the quiet, regular expansion and release of breath. The shift is measured, no escalation. You move toward the spiral stair and descend halfway. Pause at the landing. The stone wall beside you holds a deeper coolness now. You rest your fingers against it briefly. The vibration of the mechanism carries faintly through the masonry, steady, contained, consistent. The sea appears as a narrow vertical field through the slit window. When the beam passes across it, the water brightens in a long, horizontal band, then dims. You ascend again. Back in the lantern room, the rotation continues unchanged. The lens has settled fully into its night rhythm. No adjustment is required. You sit in the wooden chair. From this height, the beam feels broader. It passes at eye level, tracing the room in alternating bands of brightness and shadow. The glass brightens. The walls soften. The floorboards glow briefly, then return to dark. Your shoulders lower another fraction. Breathing deepens. The intervals between inhalation and exhalation widen slightly. Outside, the sea moves without emphasis. The mist absorbs some of the beam's reach, diffusing it into a gentle bloom that hovers over the surface before dissolving. You stand again, walk toward the central column. Place your palm against the housing of the mechanism. The vibration beneath it remains steady, not loud, not urgent, simply present. You remain there for several breaths, then step back. The room feels less structured now, less divided into parts. Glass, brass, wood, stone, they merge into tone rather than material. The beam defines them briefly, then releases them. You move to the western panes. Rest your forehead lightly against the glass. Cool. The sea beyond appears almost seamless with the sky. Only the beam's passage distinguishes one from the other. You close your eyes briefly. Light registers faintly through the lids as a soft warmth. It arrives, it passes. You open your eyes again, nothing has changed. The carved notch remains unseen. The lens continues turning. The weight continues descending. You resume your orbit of the room. The movement now feels less like something you initiate and more like something you inhabit. The architecture carries you. The curve absorbs your direction. Outside, a faint glow appears along a distant seam, perhaps another vessel's light, softened by mist. It does not sharpen. It remains a suggestion within darkness. You do not track it. You allow it to exist within the wider field. The beam sweeps outward again, returns, sweeps again. Your breathing aligns without effort. Inhale as brightness gathers near the southern arc. Exhale as it glides westward. The rhythm stabilizes. You descend slowly to the keeper's quarters once more. The lower chamber feels enclosed in a different way, warmer, steadier. The lamp burns low on the table. Its flame is small, unwavering. You sit briefly. The beam above casts faint arcs of glow through the small window, marking its passage without demanding attention. You rise again. Ascend. Back in the lantern room, the night feels deeper. not heavier, just more unified. The mist has grown denser along the water's surface. The beam widens further as it passes through, becoming less defined at its edges. The carved notch catches one brief glimmer of light, then disappears again. You stand near the center. Allow the rotation to continue around you. Awareness widens outward toward scale. The long sweep across open sea, then lowers inward toward the weight in your stance, the even rise of your chest. No pattern asserts itself. No repetition demands emphasis. Only continuation. The lighthouse does not stand against the night, it stands within it. The sea does not resist illumination, it receives it. The mechanism does not strain. It translates descent into motion with exact calm. You move toward the rail one final time, rest both hands upon it. The metal meets you at the same temperature. The boundary between palm and iron dissolves into equilibrium. Outside, the horizon is fully absent. Sky and sea merge into layered dark. Only the beam defines depth. It extends outward in a broad arc, touches the surface gently, withdraws. You inhale slowly, exhale longer. The breath feels less separate from the room now, less separate from the turning lens. You remain upright, still, not frozen, simply aligned. The tower turns, the sea moves, the mist gathers, the beam completes another sweep. It does not feel new now, it feels embedded. You step away from the rail, not because anything has changed, because movement continues. The floorboards hold your weight with quiet familiarity. There is no shift in tone when you cross the room, only the steady alternation of glow and dimness as the lens turns. You pause beside the central column. Rest your shoulder lightly against it. The metal is firm, balanced. It does not press back. Outside, the mist has settled closer to the water's surface. The beam widens as it reaches it. Edges blur, distance softens. You do not follow the arc outward this time. You let it pass beyond your field of vision. Your awareness lowers instead, to the weight in your feet, to the quiet line of your spine, to the air moving in and out without adjustment. The room feels less divided now. Glass no longer reads as barrier. Stone no longer reads as wall. They hold the same darkness. The same tone. You move again, one slow half circle, then stop near the southern panes. The carved notch is fully gone in this light, not erased, just absorbed. The lens continues turning. The mechanism continues descending. The sea continues shifting beneath the arc of light. And you remain here, not completing the movement, not anticipating the next sweep, simply standing within the steady rotation as night deepens another fraction without asking to be marked. The night settles more fully into the structure of the tower. Not as weight, as presence. You remain in the lantern room, but you are no longer observing in the way you did earlier. The beam turns, the sea shifts, the mechanism descends, and none of it requires your interpretation. The rotation feels internal now. The arc of light passes across the glass, across the brass rail, across the floorboards. It grazes your sleeve once, then moves on. You do not track it, you sense it. A soft brightening at the edge of awareness, then dimness again. The intervals remain even, predictable, but not mechanical in feeling. Outside, the mist has thickened slightly over the water, not fog. Just a low, suspended softness that diffuses the beam outward so that its reach appears wider than before, less defined. The sea beneath it looks almost matte until touched by light. Then it glows faintly, as if remembering something. You move away from the windows. The central column holds a faint warmth from the lamp's sustained burn. When your palm rests against it, the contact feels continuous rather than contrasting. No temperature difference, no edge. The descending weight inside the shaft continues its slow journey downward. You listen, not closely, just enough to register the low articulation of gears translating gravity into motion. There is comfort in the predictability of it, no surprise, no fluctuation. You walk once around the perimeter of the room. The floorboards do not echo sharply now. Night has absorbed that quality. The sound of your steps dissolves almost immediately after contact. Halfway through the circle, you stop near the western panes. Darkness beyond them has deepened into a nearly uniform field. The beam extends outward and briefly defines surface before dissolving again. You can no longer distinguish where sea becomes sky except when light outlines texture. The horizon is implied, not seen. You rest your forearm lightly along the rail. Your breathing continues without adjustment. Inhale, exhale. The beam passes behind you this time rather than in front. You feel it as warmth at your back before it arcs away. You do not turn to follow. The room remains stable regardless of where you face. You step toward the stairwell opening and look down into the spiral. The descent disappears into shadow. The faintest reflection of rotating light travels along the inner wall for a moment, then fades. Even here, removed from the glass, the rhythm persists. You begin downward, slowly. The stone beneath your boots carries a quieter tone than earlier in the evening. The air feels denser inside the shaft. The vibration of motion hums faintly through the masonry. Halfway down, you pause, not because anything calls for inspection, because stillness continues to deepen. You rest your hand flat against the wall. The stone holds night differently than the glass above. It feels cooler, more grounded, less responsive to passing light. The weight continues descending somewhere above you. Measured, steady, you descend another few steps and stop again, this time beside the column where the rope travels downward. You watch it move. The rope does not sway. It does not hesitate. It lowers with quiet certainty. No intervention required. You stand there for several breaths. Inhale, exhale. The mechanism continues. You ascend again. The lantern room greets you with the same alternating glow. The beam passes across the panes in a wide arc, softened by mist. The floorboards catch and release light in slow succession. The carved notch in the wood is nearly invisible now. Only when the beam aligns at a precise angle does it reveal itself for a fraction of a second, then vanish. You do not crouch to examine it. You let it exist within the rotation. You walk toward the eastern windows. The sea appears darker on this side, deeper in tone. When the beam sweeps across, the mist glows outward rather than sharply forward, expanding the light's presence into a wider halo. Distance becomes less important. What matters is continuity. You lean slightly closer to the glass. Your reflection merges faintly with darkness. You do not appear sharply. Your outline blends into the night beyond. The boundary between inside and outside has thinned. You remain upright for a long moment. The beam returns, passes, returns again. There is no counting, only recurrence. You move back toward the center of the room. The lens turns with patient gravity. Its prisms hold brightness gently, distributing it without strain. The brass housing carries warmth, but only enough to feel alive. You lower yourself briefly to sit on the floor beside the central column. From this height, the room feels taller. The sweep of light appears broader as it passes across the glass above you. The sound of the sea filters faintly upward through layers of stone and air. It no longer arrives as distinct waves. It arrives as a steady undertone. The tower hums, not audibly. Internally, you feel it through the floorboards, through the air, through your own breathing. Inhale, exhale. The intervals between breaths lengthen slightly, not forced, just natural. The beam sweeps again. It travels across the mist, widening into softness before retracting into darkness. You remain seated. The floor beneath you feels stable. The wood carries warmth from earlier light, now slowly equalizing with the cooler air. After a while, you rise again. Movement unfolds gradually. Knees straighten. Spine aligns. Balance returns without effort. You resume your slow circuit. This time, you vary your path slightly, walking closer to the inner column rather than the outer rail. The light behaves differently from this position. It brushes past you at a shorter distance, catching the curve of your sleeve before moving on. You do not attempt to time it, you let it pass. Outside, the mist thickens further along the water's surface. The beam no longer appears as a distinct ribbon at its farthest reach. It dissolves into luminous haze before fading. The sea remains steady. The tower remains steady. The mechanism remains precise. You descend again, not all the way this time, just far enough to feel the stone air surround you. The lower chamber carries a deeper quiet. The lamp in the quarters below burns low, its glow barely touching the stairwell. You stand between levels. Above, rotation. Below, rest. Neither demands your attention more than the other. You rest your hand once more against the wall. The stone does not warm beneath your palm. It remains as it has always been, patient, dense, holding weight without complaint. After several breaths, you ascend again. The lantern room's rotation feels more interior now. Less like something happening in space and more like something unfolding in continuity. The beam completes another sweep. The carved notch briefly reveals itself. The brass rail catches a muted halo, then dimness returns. You stop near the southern panes and stand there without leaning. Your posture is neutral, balanced. No shift in weight required. The light passes. You do not react. The rhythm continues. Night deepens by increments too small to isolate. The sea grows darker. The mist thickens. The beam widens. Inside, nothing strains, nothing accelerates. The weight continues descending. It will require winding later, not now. Now there is only rotation. You take one final slow walk around the room, not completing a circle deliberately, just moving until movement feels complete. You stop near the center again. The beam passes once more, and you remain upright within the steady alternation of glow and shadow, the night continuing to settle without announcement, the lighthouse holding its quiet arc across the water without needing to be watched. Not ending, not resolving, just turning. The hour moves deeper into night, not darker in a dramatic way, just steadier. The beam continues its measured arc across the water, widening slightly as mist thickens over the sea. Its edges are no longer distinct at distance. It does not cut through the dark, it rests within it. You remain in the lantern room, not standing in one fixed place now, but drifting in small, unplanned shifts. A step toward the eastern panes, a turn inward toward the column, a pause beside the rail. The rotation does not require supervision. It requires presence. The descending weight continues its quiet translation of gravity into motion. You no longer need to check it. The certainty of its pace has entered your awareness as something assumed rather than verified. The floorboards feel cooler now beneath your boots. The warmth gathered during daylight has equalized with the air. When the beam passes across the grain of wood, it reveals faint variations in tone before withdrawing again. You pause near the western windows. The sea is almost indistinguishable from sky now except when illuminated. The mist holds the beam longer in its immediate reach, expanding it outward in a softened halo. Beyond that, darkness absorbs it without resistance. There is no sense of isolation here, only scale. You rest your hand lightly against the glass. The surface meets your palm at the same temperature. No contrast, no chill, just contact. Outside, the wind has gentled further. The water moves in long, quiet swells, their shape inferred rather than seen. The beam completes another pass. A faint shape emerges within it, perhaps a distant vessel, perhaps only the suggestion of structure where light and haze interact. It remains indistinct. The lighthouse does not attempt to define it further. You step away from the pane. The lantern room feels enclosed but not confined. The curved glass creates a continuous horizon. There are no corners to collect shadow. The light itself shapes the interior. You walk toward the central column and rest your shoulder lightly against it. The brass housing carries a faint internal warmth from the lamp, not heat, just steady function. The mechanism's quiet articulation remains consistent. You close your eyes briefly. The beam continues whether you watch it or not. You feel its passage as warmth across your cheek, as shifting brightness through your lids. It does not demand attention. Breathing slows. The inhale grows deeper without effort. The exhale lengthens further. The rotation aligns with it, not deliberately, but naturally. You open your eyes again and begin descending the spiral. The stone stair feels more grounded now than earlier. Night has absorbed the echo from your steps. The air in the shaft feels dense, layered with the faint scent of oil and stone. Halfway down, you pause, you listen. The weight continues downward. Its movement is steady, exact. You do not calculate how long remains before rewinding will be required. You trust the interval. You descend another few steps and look at the rope. It lowers without sway, without interruption. Gravity performs its role cleanly. You rest your fingertips briefly against the stone beside it. The vibration of the mechanism hums faintly through the wall. You remain there for several breaths, then ascend again. The lantern room greets you with the same steady alternation of light and shadow. You walk slowly around the perimeter, but this time you vary the distance from the rail. Sometimes closer to the glass, sometimes nearer the column. The beam behaves differently depending on your position. Near the glass, it expands outward into mist. Near the center, it casts broader interior shadows that slide across the floor in muted arcs. You pause near the carved notch in the wood. The beam passes. For a brief moment, the indentation glows faintly before vanishing again. You do not kneel, you do not trace it. You let it remain what it is, a trace that has blended into structure. The night outside has deepened further. No visible stars pierce sharply through the haze. Instead, faint concentrations of light gather in softened clusters overhead. The sea continues its broad, patient movement. You move toward the southern panes. The beam reaches this section and briefly illuminates the low mist curling over the water's surface. It appears almost like breath rising and dispersing. You lean slightly forward. The glass reflects a faint outline of your face, but only as suggestion. The interior and exterior overlap in tone. The boundary between watcher and watch dissolves. You step back. The room feels more interior now. Less about horizon, more about rhythm. You cross to the stairwell once more and descend fully this time. The lower chamber holds a warmer quiet. The small lamp in the quarters continues burning low. Its glow does not compete with the rotating beam above. It simply occupies its own contained sphere. You enter the keeper's quarters. The table rests as before. The chair remains slightly angled. The bed holds its earlier shape. You sit briefly. From here, the rotation above is not seen, but sensed. The glow crosses the small window at regular intervals, casting a softened arc along the stone opposite. The tower does not require you to stand beside it continuously. It carries its function with or without your gaze. You rise and return to the stair. Ascending again, you notice how the stone wall holds the coolness of night more fully now. The temperature difference between levels is subtle but perceptible. Back in the lantern room, the air feels thinner, more open. The beam continues. The mist shifts slightly with the wind. The sea remains steady. You move toward the center and stand directly beside the lens. Its prisms glow from within, dividing brightness into layers that overlap without sharpness. The motion feels fluid rather than mechanical from this proximity. You extend your hand toward the outer housing, not touching the glass, but close enough to feel warmth radiating outward. It is gentle. Contained, you walk another slow circuit. This time you stop near the eastern panes and remain still for several full rotations. Light gathers, passes, returns, passes again. The repetition no longer feels repetitive. It feels continuous. Your breathing deepens again. Inhale. Exhale. The intervals between breaths widen slightly. Not forced, just settled. You lean lightly against the rail. The metal holds your weight without coolness or heat. It meets your body at equilibrium. Outside, the sea has flattened further in appearance. Only when the beam reaches it does texture briefly reappear. You notice how the mist does not resist the light. It diffuses it, expands it, softens it. The lighthouse does not pierce the night. It participates in it. You descend halfway once more. You listen to the mechanism, still steady, still exact. You return to the lantern room and remain near the stair opening this time rather than circling. The beam continues its arc behind you. You do not turn to follow. Your posture is upright, balanced. Night holds its shape. The weight descends, the lens turns. You step away from the opening and walk toward the western panes one final time this hour. The sea appears darker than before. The horizon no longer exists as a visible line, only gradation. The beam sweeps outward and dissolves into haze. You rest your palm once more against the glass. Temperature remains matched. Contact remains neutral. You remain there for several breaths. No adjustment required. The beam returns. Passes, returns again. Inside, the carved notch rests in shadow. The brass rail catches a muted glimmer. The floorboards hold steady. You step back toward the center. The mechanism hums faintly. Gravity continues its descent. Nothing strains, nothing accelerates. The tower remains aligned with the sea aligned with night, and you aligned with the steady continuation of both. Not concluding, not resolving, just remaining within the turning light as it carries itself outward and returns again, evenly and without interruption. The night has settled into its full depth. Not heavier, not colder, simply complete. The beam continues its slow revolution above, and you remain in the keeper's quarters below, aware of it without needing to see it. The small lamp on the table burns lower now. Its flame is steady, contained within glass that holds warmth without flare. The light it casts is amber, soft along the edges, leaving corners of the room in layered shadow. You sit at the table again, not because there is work to do, because the posture feels balanced. Your hands rest flat against the wood. The grain beneath your palms is smooth from years of contact. When you shift your fingers slightly, the faintest whisper of skin against surface registers and disappears. Above you, the beam completes another arc. Its glow passes across the narrow window, sliding briefly along the opposite wall before fading. You do not turn to follow it. You let it mark time for you. Breathing slows further. Inhale, exhale. The pause between grows wider. The tower carries the night without strain. You rise and move toward the door that leads outside. The handle turns easily. The air beyond is cooler now, though not sharp. It carries moisture from the sea in a way that feels dense but not heavy. You step onto the rock. The lighthouse stands behind you, its beam sweeping steadily over the dark water. From this lower vantage, the arc appears broader, its reach more visible before mist dissolves it into haze. The sea moves in long, even swells. No crest breaks dramatically. No foam lingers longer than necessary. You walk slowly along the narrow path that curves around the base of the tower. The rock beneath your boots is damp, but firm, its uneven texture familiar enough that your steps require no thought. The beam passes overhead. For a moment, your shadow lengthens across the stone, then withdraws. You pause near the edge where the rock slopes toward the water. The tide has shifted again since afternoon. The pools that formed earlier now hold darker water. Their surfaces remain still unless touched by the faintest ripple from a passing swell. You crouch and rest your hand lightly against the stone beside one of the pools. The rock feels cooler than before, holding the night more fully. Its surface is textured with subtle ridges worn by decades of weather. You trace one shallow groove with your fingertips, not carved deliberately, worn by repetition. The beam passes again, glancing across the water and briefly catching the surface of the pool. It glows for a breath before returning to shadow. You remain crouched for several cycles of the light. The rhythm does not change, it continues. You stand slowly and look outward. The sea is nearly seamless now. Sky and water merge into one field of dark. Only the moving beam creates distinction. You realize that from here, the lighthouse does not feel like a structure projecting light into emptiness. It feels like a pulse, regular, measured, calm. You return to the tower. Inside, the spiral stair carries you upward again. The stone beneath your hand feels cooler than before. The faint vibration of the mechanism hums through it steadily, unchanged. At the lantern room, the rotation continues with exact timing. You stand near the central column and allow yourself to remain still for several revolutions. The carved notch in the floor is invisible now, except when the beam passes directly across it. The brass rail glows briefly, then dims. The prisms of the lens divide the light into layered planes that overlap without glare. Outside, mist thickens slightly. The beam appears wider in response, less defined at distance. You move to the eastern panes and watch the arc reach toward open water. There is no vessel visible now, no distant shape entering and leaving the glow. Just sea, just light, just repetition. You rest both hands lightly on the rail. The metal meets your skin without contrast. Temperature has equalized fully. The boundary between touch and surface feels minimal. Breathing deepens again. Inhale, exhale. The rotation aligns with it without conscious effort. You descend once more. This time, you do not pause midway. You continue to the keeper's quarters and close the door gently behind you. The small lamp burns low. You cross to it and turn the flame down another fraction. The room dims further. The beam above remains the primary illumination now, its sweep visible through the window at regular intervals. You sit on the edge of the bed. The mattress compresses beneath your weight and settles quickly. The day has been long, but not demanding. The night is longer still, but not heavy. You remove your boots and place them neatly beside the wall. Your feet meet the wooden floor briefly. The boards are cool, but not cold. You lie back. The pillow receives your head without resistance. Above you, the beam continues. It reaches the window. It passes. It returns. The pattern repeats with unbroken steadiness. Your breathing slows again. The inhale grows softer. The exhale lengthens slightly more than before. The body releases small tensions one by one. Shoulders ease, jaw unclenches. Fingers loosen against the blanket. The mechanism continues its descent. You do not calculate how long remains before rewinding will be required. You trust the design. Outside, the sea continues its long conversation with the rock. The sound filters faintly through stone, and height, a low rhythm that does not demand interpretation. Another sweep of light crosses the ceiling. The glow touches the edge of the bed and withdraws. You turn onto your side. The blanket shifts quietly. The room remains unchanged. The tower remains steady. The night holds its depth. You notice that the breath now moves without effort. Inhale, pause, exhale. The pause lengthens slightly each time. The carved notch above remains in darkness. The brass rail waits where it has always been. The lens turns. The weight descends. Nothing falters. You allow your awareness to soften further. The boundary between sound and silence blurs. The hum of gears merges with the distant sea until they form one extended, even tone. Thoughts appear briefly and dissolve. There is no narrative to follow. no task to anticipate. The lighthouse does not stand against the night, it stands within it, and you lie within the tower's heart, aligned with its steady function. Another sweep of light crosses the window. It feels gentler now, more diffuse. Mist outside has thickened, broadening the beam. Your breathing slows again. Exhale extends longer than inhale. The body grows heavier against the mattress, supported, balanced. Above, gravity continues its patient descent. Rotation continues. The arc of light extends outward, touches nothing sharply, and returns. You feel the rhythm rather than hear it now. It exists beneath awareness rather than within it. The lamp beside you burns low enough that its glow barely outlines the table. You reach out and extinguish it completely. Darkness gathers softly in the room. Only the passing sweep of the lighthouse remains, faint through the window. Inhale, exhale. The breath quiets. The mechanism continues without supervision. The sea continues without resistance. The tower continues without strain. And you drift further into stillness, not pulled downward, not pushed away, simply settling into the long, steady arc of the night's rotation, carried by the same calm continuity that holds stone, glass, water, and light in balance. Another sweep of light passes across the window. This time you do not follow it with thought. You simply register the shift in brightness against closed lids. A soft arrival, a soft departure. Nothing sharp, nothing sudden. The tower continues its patient work above you. The weight lowers by increments too small to measure in a single moment. The gears articulate in quiet succession. The lens turns through darkness as it has turned through countless nights before this one. Outside, the mist thickens slightly over the sea. The beam no longer reaches in a defined line. It expands as it moves outward, broadening at the edges, becoming more presence than direction. The water receives it without disturbance. You feel that reception rather than see it. The rock beneath the tower holds steady against the tide's repetition. The tide presses, the tide releases. The cycle continues without emphasis. Your breathing deepens once more. Inhale, the chest rises softly without effort. Exhale, the body settles further into the mattress. The distinction between listening and resting dissolves. The hum of the mechanism no longer feels separate from your own internal rhythm. Both continue at the same unhurried pace. Another sweep of light, another widening glow against the window, then darkness again. The night does not advance. It holds, the lighthouse does not conquer it. It moves within it. And you remain carried in that same long, even motion, supported by stone, guided by gravity, steadied by repetition, as the beam continues its calm rotation far above, exact and unwavering. The night settles fully into its own depth. There is no shift you can point to as the moment it arrived. Only the gradual lowering of tone, the soft merging of sky and sea, the steady continuation of the turning beam. Above you, the lens completes another rotation. Light gathers, extends, softens, withdraws. The sequence remains even, predictable, measured without needing to be counted. You lie still within the lower chamber of stone. The mattress supports you completely now. No muscle holds effort. No joint adjusts for comfort. The tower does not require anything further from you. Its motion has entered the night as easily as breathing enters sleep. Outside, the sea has lost all sharpness. There are no visible lines between swell and trough now. Only a broad, cohesive movement that lifts and lowers in one slow, shared rhythm. The beam travels across it. When the light passes, the water does not flare. It thickens. It becomes momentarily luminous. Then it returns to shadow without resistance. Your breathing mirrors that arc without intention. Inhale as brightness expands. Exhale as it thins into dark. The pattern repeats, not as effort, as alignment. Somewhere above, the counterweight descends another fraction of its length. You do not hear it distinctly. You sense it, the faint articulation of gears through stone, the low continuity of metal meeting metal in steady succession. The tower is awake. You are resting within its wakefulness. The lamp beside your bed burns low. Its glow is small and steady. You reach once more and turn it down until only a faint amber presence remains. The room does not disappear, it softens, edges round, shadows gather gently in corners. Nothing feels obscured, nothing feels hidden. The beam passes the window again. A brief expansion of pale light stretches across the ceiling, then recedes. The night deepens not in darkness, but in thickness. Air feels fuller now. Cooler, held, the scent of oil and stone and salt lingers faintly in the space. You notice how still your body has become, hands resting loosely, jaw unclenched, shoulders lowered without instruction, breath extending longer on the exhale than on the inhale now, release without effort. Above you, the rotation continues. The lantern room holds its circular rhythm. Brass glows briefly, then dims. Glass brightens briefly, then settles. The carved notch in the floor receives a thin line of light, then returns to shadow. It remains where it has always been, unchanged. The sea continues beyond the panes, vast but not demanding, moving but not urgent. The tower does not stand against it, it stands within it. The beam does not conquer darkness, it participates in it. You feel that participation now. The distinction between keeper and mechanism dissolves. The distinction between breath and rotation softens. The distinction between wakefulness and rest thins. Another sweep. Light widens outward, fades, returns. Your eyelids remain closed now. There is no need to open them. The rhythm is fully internal. The hum above you feels like a low, steady current running through stone and bone alike. It does not disturb, it steadies. Outside, mist drifts thicker across the surface of the sea. When the beam reaches it, the glow expands gently rather than cutting through. Light becomes atmosphere. The boundary between illumination and air dissolves. The water absorbs everything. The sky holds everything. The tower continues. You feel the gradual lowering of the weight within the column, not as descent, as inevitability. Gravity doing what gravity has always done, translating downward pull into outward reach. There will come a time to wind it again. That time is not now. Now there is only continuation. Breath, rotation, sea, stone. The rhythm has become so even that it no longer needs attention. You rest deeper into the mattress. The last small adjustments in muscle and spine complete themselves. Nothing else asks to be done. Another pass of light touches the window. Faint, soft, gone again. The room does not grow darker in its absence. It remains steady. Your breathing slows further. Inhale, a quiet gathering. Exhale, a longer release. The space between breaths widens, not empty, complete. Above, the beam continues its broad arc across water that does not resist, across sky that does not fracture, across distance that does not end. You feel the stone beneath the tower holding firm against tide and time. The rock has received wave after wave without complaint. The tower has received wind after wind without protest. The lens has turned through night after night without fatigue, and you have moved within all of it without needing to force anything into place. The carved notch remains in the lantern room. The faint salt streaks remain on the glass. The polished rail remains beneath countless hands across countless watches. All of it continues, nothing dramatic, nothing heightened, only repetition that deepens rather than loops. The night carries the lighthouse forward. The lighthouse carries the beam. The beam carries its arc across the sea, and the sea carries everything beyond sight. Your awareness thins further, not vanishing, settling. The hum of the mechanism merges fully with the low, even rhythm of the tide. They are no longer separate sounds. They are one continuous tone. The air cools another fraction. The mattress supports without shift. The small lamp extinguishes finally, its last glow dissolving into the whiter dark. Now only the beam marks interval. A softened sweep across ceiling. A dimming, another sweep. Another dimming, breath continues, long, even unforced. The tower remains exactly as it was. The sea remains exactly as it was. The sky holds its depth without urgency. You do not need to follow the beam. You do not need to track the rotation. You do not need to hold the watch in conscious thought. The mechanism knows its measure. The oil burns steadily. The weight descends precisely. And the night gathers, the quiet holds. The beam completes another sweep. Its glow moves across the ceiling in a softened arc, tracing the curve of stone before fading again into quiet shadow. The rotation does not slow. It does not quicken. It holds its measured pace without variation. Outside, the mist thickens slightly across the surface of the sea, not dense enough to conceal, just enough to blur edges. When the light reaches it now, the glow spreads wider than before, becoming less a line and more a field. The water receives it without resistance, then lets it go. Your breathing deepens further. The inhale is unhurried, filling without strain. The exhale lengthens, extending past the point where effort would normally release. The space between breaths widens again, not empty, settled. You feel the weight of the tower above you not pressing down, but anchoring. Stone layered upon stone, iron seated within masonry, glass held in brass, everything supported by rock that has stood against tide for longer than memory holds. Nothing here trembles, nothing here asks. The mechanism continues its descent. You can almost sense the rope unspooling in precise increments, the counterweight lowering with quiet inevitability, each small movement translating into rotation without friction. The lantern room turns steadily. Light expands, light softens, light returns. The pattern has moved beyond conscious tracking now. It is background, foundation, a steady pulse beneath the surface of thought. Outside, the tide shifts again in slow, nearly imperceptible adjustment. The water gathers closer to the rock, then eases away. No crash, no insistence, only repetition shaped by gravity and distance. The mist holds low along the surface. The beam touches it and becomes larger, warmer, more diffused. You feel that diffusion within your own awareness. Edges blur, concerns lose their outline. Thought no longer separates itself into clear pieces. The tower's rhythm replaces inner dialogue. You notice how completely supported you are. The mattress beneath you carries your full weight. The stone beneath that holds without movement. The rock beneath that anchors into seabed beyond sight. The ocean beyond that moves without interruption, layer upon layer of steadiness. Another sweep. Light grazes the window and passes. A faint warmth touches the wall above your head before fading again. Your shoulders drop another fraction. The jaw rests fully. Hands lie open. Breath slows again. The inhale no longer reaches high into the chest. It fills lower now, expanding gently through the ribs. The exhale releases longer still. There is no need to correct posture. No need to check the mechanism. No need to open your eyes. The tower has entered its full night rhythm. It does not depend on observation. It does not depend on vigilance in every moment. It turns because it was built to turn. It shines because it was designed to shine. It stands because the rock beneath it stands, and you lie within it because rest is allowed here. The sea continues its long conversation with the shore. The sound reaches you faintly through stone, low, and even, a steady presence rather than distinct waves. It merges with the hum of the descending weight until the two become indistinguishable. The beam passes again, and again, and again, each rotation exact, each interval complete. The carved notch in the lantern room remains unseen above you, yet present in the architecture of the night. A small human mark within a structure built for endurance. Not disruption, not flaw, just presence absorbed into continuity. The salt streaks on the glass remain. The brass rail remains. The spiral stair remains. Everything is exactly where it belongs. Your breathing aligns completely now. Inhale a soft gathering. Exhale a long, unbroken release. The space between breaths widens until it feels like floating. There is no effort left in the body, no scanning, no listening for threat. The beam continues its wide arc across the water without interruption. The mist receives it, the sea receives it, the sky receives it, and then darkness returns gently, not as absence, but as depth. The tower hums, the sea moves, the weight descends, and your awareness loosens further, dissolving into the steady architecture of the night. The lighthouse continues as it always has. Its rhythm remains. You do not need to follow it. You are already within it. The night gathers, the quiet holds, and the rest will carry itself.